Well, what is hidden in Antarctica? Maybe a better question is, what are they hiding in Antarctica? Massive underground cities, advanced propulsion technology, UFOs. Well, in 1926, Admiral Richard Byrd claimed to have been the first to fly over the North Pole with pilot Floyd Bennett, making him a national hero at the time. Then decades later, he carried out Operation High Jump. After World War II, he led a massive U.S. Navy expedition to Antarctica, which has been the subject of many documentaries and, of course, many books. And it was the largest to date to explore Antarctica, mapped over 500,000 square miles of the continent. But something that maybe didn't get a lot of attention is what one of his tasks was, which was to look at what the Nazis were also doing in Antarctica. Did they have UFOs, crashed UFOs that they were working on, the reverse engineering of these craft? Did they have these craft that they were secretly hiding into Antarctica, being housed there? It's all in the documents. Like, it's not me making that up. But John B. Lath, who worked for Operation of Strategic Services, the OSS, which you'll recall was the predecessor to the CIA, he admitted this towards the end of his life. He claimed that Admiral Byrd didn't just fly, I'm not say the end of his life, excuse me, but he said this much later in life, I should say, that he admitted that Admiral Byrd didn't just fly over Antarctica, he actually entered inner Earth. Watch.
Honestly, ladies and gentlemen, he flew 1,200 miles with the wind in his back into the inside of this planet. Not a molten core, far from it. Continental shells bigger than on the surface, seas that were equal to ours, and he took 300 photographs and brought them back, and I tried to see them, and Franklin Birch, who was at the National Archives, would not let me in. Oh, I got in the cage, but I couldn't look at anything. Caldwell found those records and read them in 1940, and he took his round-wing plane in and went right through the Earth and came out at the South Pole in a 125-mile opening there. That's one thing he did. I told you that was 1940. That was a great accomplishment of the round-wing plane at that point. We hadn't had to fight a war. We hadn't had to do anything. 1952, I hesitate to tell you. I've had 3 attempts on my life, and I don't know if I'll walk away from this meeting if I say any more. I've had the needle, I've been poisoned, and I've had people sent to kill me.
That's what happens to truth tellers, of course. So he flew through a massive hole 50 miles from the South Pole that is a core secret, as they call it. And my next guest claims that this is why the NSA is there, using the cover of air sampling station to make sure that there's a no-fly zone over this area or any ground access. Our next guest has been to Antarctica and has really made it his life's work to expose what's going on there. He's definitely gotten into battles, certainly with other Antarctica whistleblowers. But we wanted to hear his side of the story and all about his new book called Secrets of Antarctica. Here it is. You can read it right now. It's available on Amazon and other ebook publishers. It's called Secrets of Antarctica, The Untold History of the Ice Continent. And that is Brad Olson, the researcher and author of that book. Brad, welcome to the show. Great to finally talk with you.
Hey, Clayton, thank you so much for having me on. Been a long time coming, but now that the book is at the printer, it will be shipping at the end of this month. But the ebook is available, and good opportunity to have this discussion.
Yeah, so I want to kind of maybe start at the beginning for you, and what brought you to wanting to start to research Antarctica? Like, where did you start on this journey, and how did you get into this?
Well, I do a series of books on esoteric subjects, and boy, Antarctica is about the most esoteric continent we have in America, in the world. And when I had the great opportunity to go down there 7 years ago via a sailboat from Ushuaia, Argentina to the Palmer Peninsula, it was like pulling the layers off an onion. You get one question, and then you get 10, 10 possible answers. So the layers just kept getting deeper and deeper the more I dug into it. And then I decided, well, I got to write a book about this because I was coming into so much information, like that clip you just played of an intelligence officer talking about Admiral Byrd's flight down there, which is also described in detail in his diary that was published by his son, who was actually on the ship with him down to Antarctica during Operation High Jump. His son was also in the Navy, Richard Byrd Jr., and he also was going to give a talk on the anniversary of High Jump 40 years later, and he disappeared off the train going to Washington, D.C. from Boston. He was found a month later wearing a different set of clothes and dead in a Baltimore warehouse. So the secrecy continues with all things surrounding Antarctica.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was killed in a Baltimore warehouse?
Richard Byrd's son, who is also named Richard Byrd Jr.
I didn't know that. Wow.
And he was on the ship during High Jump and saw everything his dad saw. When his dad got back to Washington, D.C., they put him in quarantine. He was basically read the Riot Act because he spoke to a journalist in El Mercurio newspaper, which I reprint in the book, both in Spanish and in English, so people can get a feel for what he said. But he said, in the event of another war, we would be faced with an enemy that could fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. And so this is right after High Jump. Then he gets back to America. They call off the expedition 2 months into the 6-month trip. And Admiral Byrd was read the Riot Act for talking to the journalists and was given a gag order for the rest of his life. His son released the diary, and from there, the mystery once again just gets deeper.
So we just played a clip there of John Leith, who worked for the Operation of Strategic Services and then later the CIA. How did he come into this information about Admiral Byrd's trip? He saw the documents, or he got into the cage with the documents. They weren't allowed to show him anything. Do you know what became of him, and what more information did he uncover?
Well, still to this day, Operation High Jump is classified. So he, like myself and perhaps many others who have tried to get information through the Freedom of Information Act, you cannot crack that nut. It's a very difficult one to penetrate. And so I think he was in the same position, but here he is coming from national intelligence, and he still can't even get in there to see all those 300 pictures that Byrd took on that amazing flight. Now, Byrd did have an interview less than a year before he died. So he went down to Antarctica 5 different times, and the last one after Operation High Jump was called Operation Deep Freeze. And then he came back from that. He was still very tight-lipped about everything going on down there, but he did do this interview with Longines watch company, and he made some very curious statements, one of which was when asked what young people could do as far as exploring the polar regions, said the North Pole is pretty crowded up there, but if they go to the South Pole and go beyond the pole, then they could see this land that he was describing. But Clayton, I'll tell you, there is nothing beyond the pole. For hundreds of miles on the polar plateau, it is just flat, desolate, and nothing. Unless, of course, we're talking about this massive hole in the ice about 50 miles away from the South Pole. And I have numerous data points, which I have recounted in the book, that point to this giant hole in the ice. And I should also point out that Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world.
Really?
So with all the geothermal activity there, you have the propensity for very large under ice domes, this 2-mile thick plateau of ice. It's going to need a chimney. It's going to need an outlet for some of that heat to escape. And that's what this hole in the ice at near the South Pole is all about.
So you say it's 50 miles wide? Is that how large the hole is, or 50 miles from the South Pole?
50 miles from the South Pole. And Linda Moulton Howe's whistleblower, Brian S., and you and I had text about this a few months ago, and I might be able to get him on the show. He's now willing to talk. But he was telling Linda Moulton Howe in several of her interviews that he did with him. You can find those on YouTube. But she gave me his phone number, and we had about an hour conversation when I was researching my book several months ago. And he described an emergency evacuation where they had to fly out of South Pole. And because it was somebody's life on the line, they defied the no-fly zone order. And they went over it, and it's this air sampling station area. And he said, there's no buildings there, there's no air sampling. It's just a cover so people cannot fly low altitude over the hole. And when another one of your guests was on, he showed some maps, which actually I took screen captures from Redacted that I reproduced in the book of the area over the South Pole. And it also says you're not allowed to go there overland either. Now, what that has to do with air sampling, I don't know, but it's a no-go zone, not just a no-fly zone at low altitude, but a no-go zone. And Brian S. said there were cat tracks. So like when you see a ski mountain getting groomed, that's a snowcat. That's how they transport most of the goods in Antarctica. And also snowmobile tracks that went out to the hole. Brian S. told me when they were looking at it, and it was everybody on the plane, and they discussed it after that flight, that there was a road that corkscrews down into the hole. So you can actually go down there, presumably 2 miles to the continental level overland.
Now, let me tell you, this is a nifty device. If you are keen on having clean water at any temperature on your countertop, this is a device you have to look into.
Our kids love it.
Yes. Just the other day, I had a little bit of a sore throat, wanted to make a tea. You can get instantly hot, instantly cold, filtered water. It's fantastic. If you choose the temperature of your water, then you can serve it to for whatever purpose. Any electrolyte drink, anything like that. Now, if you're somebody who really is concerned about the chemicals in your water system, in your town, this is a great solution because, there's a whole house filtration systems are super expensive. This is a great way to start. We've even had experts on the show that say that a lot of times if you have fluoride in your water and you boil it, well, that makes it even more toxic. So get a water filtration system that you trust, and we trust Cove Pure. So if you go to covepure.com/redacted, for a limited time, you'll get $250 off your system. Again, check it out. Go to the site, see all the ways that you can filter your water and really enjoy this. Covepure.com/redacted. Like I said, it's really popular in our house. Covepure.com/redacted.
Someone in our chat, or a bunch of people in our chat room, were saying, didn't Admiral Byrd claim, and you can correct our chat room on this, but they seem to know a lot about this, that Admiral Byrd claimed that the land underneath there was about the size of the United States. That in this hole, there's an area, this inner Earth, about the size of the United States.
Yeah, it's just remarkable how big it is down there because Antarctica is the 5th largest continent in the world. So therefore, it's going to be quite large down there, considering that there are geothermal features. So the Germans, when they set up New Schwabenland, it was specifically because they found this geothermal area called the Schumacher Ponds. And they actually landed a seaplane on it, and it never melts. It's called an Antarctic oasis. And so I would imagine down below under this hole in the ice, and it's not the only hole in the ice. I've identified several others, but this being the most prominent, and because it's right smack dab in the middle of the polar plateau, I suppose it's the most important, because when Byrd discovered the South Pole, he was the very first aviator to fly over the South Pole. And I have this map reproduced in the book. He didn't just get to the pole. He flew over the quadrant that is now the no-fly zone, which is the cover for the hole in the ice. And so he knew about it on that first flight in the 1920s. Then when he was going back during Operation High Jump, one of the very first flights, and it is in the official history record of Operation High Jump, Admiral Byrd and his radio man named Howie, only two people did the return flight. And it's at that moment that he lost 3 hours of time. They thought he was done. They thought the plane had crashed. They lost the great Admiral Byrd somewhere on his flight to the South Pole. Then he pops up 3 hours later and flies back to Little America and completes the mission.
Wow. And I've heard that as well. Yeah, that's incredible. And people in the chat room are saying the same thing. Didn't he miss time? He lost time. It's so incredibly difficult, obviously, to get to Antarctica. You can kind of skirt it a little bit, I guess, in cruise ships and things like that. Now, you've been there, right? You've been there multiple times to Antarctica?
One time.
One time. Okay. What was your experience like when you were there? Now, I know this is where you got into kind of a battle, and I'm not interested in the battle, like between whistleblowers and all of that. I would love to have like a debate, have an open forum, and have just a debate about all of this and what he saw, what you saw, what others saw. And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus at all. That's not my goal. I just want I want to have a conversation and get to the truth. That's my only mission here. So, but when you went there, what did you see?
So I took a boat down there from Ushuaia, is in Argentina. And you know how the finger of South America comes down and then the Antarctic Peninsula comes up? That is the closest connection to any continental landmass. Took us 4 days to sail over the Drake Passage, where I got violently seasick, as did most of the people on my ship. I think I lost 25 pounds on that trip. So you want a crash diet.
Right, go to Antarctica.
Try the
right.
Drake Passage. You might lose some weight on that. But what I'll tell you, Clayton, Antarctica is like no other place I've seen on Earth. And I've been to all 7 continents, traveled quite extensively throughout my life. It is an absolute frozen tundra of a planet. 99% of the continent is covered with snow and ice, with icebergs all around too. In fact, that was the very first thing we saw coming in, were just these ginormous 30-story tall icebergs. Of course, most of that is below the iceberg, and they broke off of the shelves and were starting to float to the north, which down there is into warmer climates. And then we finally got to King George Island, and that was a base run by the Poles called Arktowski. And we were a Polish vessel, 11 Poles and 3 Americans on that trip. And they welcomed us in, and we were bringing them fresh fruit and vegetables, which they're very pleased to have because you can't get that too readily down there. No supermarkets. And they invited us in. First, we had a shower. Boy, did that feel good after
I bet.
being seasick for 3 days. And then we had dinner with them and could use the internet and let everybody know that we made it down there. And then from there, it was just sailing through the Bransford Strait, touching ground on terra firma in Antarctica. And basically every day was like a new adventure. We'd go to either a different research station or to a penguin colony, for example, or sometimes went to see some seals. A lot of wildlife, and none of it is afraid of humans. That was one thing that was kind of shocking. You could just walk right up to a penguin. In fact, I have right here on my phone, just take a picture real quick. And the mother's kind of like, hey, you're blocking my view. She's not hissing with her baby chick under her legs, but the seals too. And we had a whale that swam right underneath our boat one time too. It was just amazing to see that kind of wildlife.
Let's talk about some of the other things in your book. And I pulled a few images out of your book to put here on the screen, just some of the advanced civilization photos that you share in the book. And maybe you can explain like what we're looking at here,
Sure.
which, yeah, so these are satellite images of Antarctica, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So Google Earth has just been a fantastic resource for researchers. And in many cases, I include the GPS coordinates because I want people to do their own homework on this as well. If they find something like this fascinating, to check it out. And in this particular picture, you've got two what appear to be step pyramids, kind of like the Mayan pyramids.
Mayan
Look at
temples,
there's
yeah.
even stairways in the middle of each, and then there's snowmobile tracks going around. So somebody's investigating this site. And the thing to point out here, Clayton, is Mother Nature does not create perfect right angles, not in this kind of symmetry with exactly stairways going up right on the side on all four sides. So that's what makes this particular site quite particular for evidence that there could be an antediluvian high-tech civilization that had once existed down there.
You also have some buildings protruding from the ice. Now, this is a like massive structure here. What are we looking at here?
I think this is a dome-shaped structure. Again, you have this symmetry in the lines of it, and perhaps it's close to the ocean or a lake, but why would it have this kind of symmetry in the ice? And the way it's been described is dome-like, so it's actually protruding upward, and that too could be a telltale sign for some kind of civilization down there.
Also pyramids too. So not only do we have sort of Mayan temple looking thing, we also have structures that pyramids in Antarctica.
In 3 locations, mind you. And this is the one in the Ellsworth Range. This is the one that's been on Ancient Aliens and the one that gets the lion's share of attention because it is so symmetrical, 2 kilometers on all 4 sides. And I would like to go down there again to investigate this particular site because I've talked to people that produce that will take you on a trip. And Antarctica, you can go to certain places. The idea that it's totally locked down is not true. You can actually go to several of these locations, including this pyramid. So the person who puts together trips, I talked to him. He's the logistic manager, and I showed him these images. And he said, oh, yeah, I know that one. He called it a nun attack, which is just an attractive 4-sided pyramidal mountain sticking up through the ice. I said, well, did you ever put the plane down and check it out, explore it, take a sample, climb it? He's like, no, we just fly over it from Union Glacier where they land after Puentes Arenas, Chile is where flights leave. And then we go on to, most people want to climb the tallest mountain in Antarctica called Vinson Massif, or continue on to the South Pole. So I would like to put the plane down, climb that pyramid. I climbed the Great Pyramid in Egypt once, and then we could put this to rest, whether it was created with intelligent design or if it is just a nun attack.
So there's also the question of the governments that have control over certain areas of the continent, as you mentioned, the no-fly zones and things like this. What areas do you believe are like totally off limits? Like if you were to pull up there and try to go to these locations, what would they tell you? Where would they tell you, no, you can't go?
Well, first off, the South Pole, the region in the air sampling station is a no-fly, a no-go zone. But I have a map of other regions where you can go and where presumably you can't go. So the places you can go are kind of highlighted and they have a name for it. All the other places are no. I have a story in the book about some Olympic athletes from Australia, these 2 women who were cross-country skiing across Antarctica, and they must have veered off their course because I've heard other people have done this same thing. But they started veering off their course, probably unknowingly, and all of a sudden these Navy SEALs came in and landed and said, all right, ladies, you're getting on board. You ain't going any further. And they had to cancel their trip. That was in Nexus magazine about 20 years ago.
Wow. So do you believe there's a significant U.S. military presence, an international military presence, intelligence presence there that's working in some sort of a cooperative to kind of shield what we know is there or what we don't know? I'm just curious what sort of like international laws and cooperation agreements do we have?
Well, that's the Antarctica Treaty, which was originally formulated in the late 1950s, which happened right after Operation Argus, which is still a top secret nuclear bomb testing in the Southern Ocean, right off the shore of New Schwabenland. What do you know? And that too, you cannot get information on what really happened in Operation Argus. But right after that, the Antarctica Treaty starts getting drafted and then finally ratified completely with 56 countries signing on in 1961. And one of the very first things it says, apart from no military activity or arms testing, but in specific language, no nuclear bomb testing in Antarctica. So why would they go to those lengths unless perhaps it had already been done, which could have been a reprieve or revenge from what happened at Operation High Jump in 1947. And that's the Battle of High Jump, which we reproduced with a cover designer on the cover of my book. But remember that clip you just played of the intelligence officer, he said, what happened in 1952 could take my life. I might not even walk out of that meeting. What happened in 1952 were all the UFOs over the Capitol, not just one day, but 2 times in July 1952. And I have the newspaper headlines for that in the book. And at the time, everybody thought, hey, we're getting invaded by aliens. Well, it's not. It wasn't. Most researchers worth their weight in salt will tell you those were those Antarctica Germans that could fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. And Laura Eisenhower, whose great-granddaughter was Dwight D. Eisenhower, he was the president-elect coming into the November election. It was still Truman in the White House in July 52. And according to a whistleblower named Dan Cooper, who's in Laura Eisenhower's book, Awakening the Truth Frequency, which is also published through CCC Publishing, he said that we surrendered to the Antarctica Nazis in July 52. That's why the subtitle of my book is The Untold History of the Ice Continent. And all roads lead to Antarctica, even though there are no roads that lead to Antarctica. But a lot of what has happened in the last 80 years since the conclusion of World War II points a picture that these Antarctica Nazis, now they prefer to just be known as Antarctica Germans, got out with the lion's share of technology after the war. And they set up a science station in Antarctica. And I have a military document. I've used this for my research. Many pages have yellow highlighter in it that I quoted from Captain Mark Richards. And he said the big failure of Operation High Jump is they went down there to take out any German bases. Keep in mind, this is after World War II. And the very first summer that our Allied forces could go down there, and it was more than just Americans, there were also Canadians, New Zealanders, Australians, part of Operation High Jump, that we got down there to try to find what they were working on or even capture a disc. And of course, didn't work out that way and got sent back with our tail between our legs. And what Captain Mark Richard was highlighting here was we left the Germans with their science city to continue working on backward engineering this high tech. So this is kind of the start of the Fourth Reich, or another author, David Henry, calls it the third force, that in the Cold War era, the Germans lost their fighting forces in World War II, but they kept their intelligence gathering supplies. So not sure if you know this, Clayton, but at the end of World War II, the fighting forces surrendered, but the SS did not surrender, nor did the Third Reich, the political party that they were under. So then they went underground and continued their research and kept this high technology going.
Well, certainly I know all about the move of Hitler and a lot of the Third Reich materials out into Argentina, into Misiones, Argentina, and all of that. So, I mean, I think it's clear as day that Hitler was not killed in that bunker that day. And I could go on and talk about this for hours. It's a fascinating subject. Brad, I'd love to have you back on at some point. Like I said, I'd love to set up a sort of a, I don't know, what do you call it, a roundtable discussion about all of this at some point as well. And I would love to talk about this with, any other whistleblowers or sources on this, because I think, I would love to get to the bottom of this, and I would love to go to Antarctica. I'm just putting that out there. I've said that for a long time. I absolutely want to go down there and do Redacted live from Antarctica. If I can bring a Starlink, do something down there. That'd be incredible. Brad, thank you so much. The book is called, once again, The Secrets of Antarctica. It's available now as an ebook, and then the hardback version of it will be out soon. So, Brad, thank you so much for being here on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Clayton. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, let's do that roundtable. I'd love to always try to increase our knowledge about what's going on down there. I think it is really the biggest secret on planet Earth.
Amen. I agree with you. Brad, thanks again. I really appreciate it.